Hi Blessings! Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name is Brooke and this is Pages of Blessings. So today I want to do my October reading wrap-up. I read 8 books this month. Most were library books and audiobooks. I have 2 physical books that I own and 1 library book that I still have checked out that I didn't have to return yet. But everything else was either audio or library books that have sadly already gone back to the library, so I'll make sure to put a picture of what I am talking about as we go through. This was a pretty good reading month for me. I always read more in the fall and winter. I'm such a seasonal reader in that way, where when it's cold or gray or rainy, I just want to be inside reading a book. So I kind of go through ebbs and flows. So this was a pretty strong reading month for me. As far as how the books rated, I have 1 DNF, so that's not included in the 9 that I read. So I attempted 10 and only got through 9. 1 I DNF'd, which might be a surprise to some people. And I had pretty good, I think everything got above a 3-star, 3 or above, which I will take. And I have 1 5-star read. So we will go in the order in which I read them. Actually, I'll start off with my DNF, because the book that I DNF'd, did not finish, Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osmon. I had such high hopes for this one, and I still do. I'm still willing to either try an audio version or just try reading it at a different time. I fell asleep every time I picked it up. I tried 3 consecutive days, and every time I started to read within 10-15 minutes, I was snoozing. I don't know if it's just because it's a little bit too slow paced for me. I know the dialogue between the elderly is supposed to be the best part, but I just was finding the first 50 pages really boring. For those of you who haven't heard of Thursday Murder Club, essentially what I've gathered is that it follows a group of elderly individuals who live in a assisted living home, and they investigate cold cases. I went into it with knowing a little bit but wanting to be surprised, and then ended up just being completely disappointed, and I had to shelve it. I might pick it up again, I might not, but that was my DNF for the month. So moving on to the first book that I completed, I actually have here Orphan Train by Christina Kline. This one is a dual timeline historical fiction, but based on actual events of the Orphan Train. So we have 2 different timelines. There's the 1929 timeline that starts off in New York City, and then the present day 2011 timeline in Maine. In 1929, we're following Neve and her story. Her family immigrants from Ireland, and they are not a perfect family by any means. They have their issues. The parents aren't, the best, but they're trying to make a life better for their family by moving them to America. And shortly after their arrival, there's a fire, and tragically everyone except Neve is killed. She is then placed into an orphanage and then put onto an orphan train, which takes her from New York to the Midwest, where she is adopted out, essentially bought as labor by people in the area, in the small farm towns. And this is her story of just how all that went. And then in the present day, we are following Molly, I believe is her name. She's a foster child, and so we kind of see the parallels between how Neve was feeling, never feeling like she belonged, and Molly in foster care, not really connecting with her foster family. But somehow these 2, like all dual timelines, somehow these 2 stories intertwine in a very beautiful way. Some trigger warnings. There is sexual assault of a minor in this book. It's not super graphic, but more graphic than I would have liked to read. It's not a happy book by any means. I mean, it ends up down the road being a little bit happier, and the present day timeline's a lot more happy than the 1929 timeline, but there is a lot of hard topics discussed, and the sexual assault is pretty graphic, I would say. So if that's not something you want to read about, then I would just skip this one. But overall, I gave it 3.5, 4 stars. I really enjoyed learning about the orphan trains and just how Christina Kline wrapped the 2 timelines together. Next is, I also have this one. I had no intentions of reading it this month, and then I picked it up on a trip. I picked this up in a bookshop, and I binge read it in the one weekend. So The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, which has been super hyped pretty much anywhere people read books. BookTok, I'm not on TikTok, but I've heard it's big on there. BookTube, Bookstagram. Again, I'm a little late to the party, but I decided to pick it up, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. This follows Avery Graham's. She is 15, I believe, and she somehow inherits a billionaire's fortune. And part of the stipulation of her inheritance is she has to live in the house for a year with everyone that was disinherited by this billionaire. So all of his family that essentially got nothing compared to what she got. And there ends up being puzzles and games trying to solve the mystery of why her. And I really enjoyed that aspect. It was very fast-paced in that way. And so I gave this one 4 stars. Then there was a huge twist at the end. So then I'm going to skip down and just talk, while I'm talking about this, I'll talk about the second one, because I also read the second one called The Hawthorne Legacy. And I was a little disappointed with that one. It continued with, there's a big mystery that wraps up, that ends up at the end of this book. So you're kind of left with like, oh no, what's going to happen, or what now situation when you finish this one. So jumping into the second one, there was just more puzzles and it just felt like too much of the same thing. Like, I don't know, like the author was trying too hard to repeat what she did in here. The last 100 pages I really enjoyed, but I was getting super annoyed with multiple of the main characters. One is supposed to be 15, 16, and I just felt like he acted like he was 12. The main character, Avery, I didn't agree with a lot of her decisions. I'm like, she keeps making the same decisions over and over, and they're not helping her, so why are we not growing? And then also there was some more not sexual, but like borderline sexual scenes that I was just like, I don't know, is this necessary? And then the love triangle situations going on. I was not as into the second book, and I'm really debating just not even reading the third one. I've heard that too many new characters get introduced and it gets way too hard to follow, so I might just be content. I think she could have wrapped this one up, and it would have been like, she could have added another 50 to 100 pages in this book, and it would have been like a great standalone. But I know some people love this trilogy. I don't know if it's for me. This was great. The second one, I gave 3 stars only because of the last 100 pages or so. Other than that, would have gotten probably 2. The next one I read on audio or listened to on audio is Finlay, Donovan is Killing It by, I think it's Elle Cosimano. This was another one I've seen really hyped, and I really enjoyed the audio. The narrator did a fantastic job changing her voice, and just like, it made it way more interesting to listen to. And we follow our main character, Finlay Donovan, who is an author, and she writes a lot of murder mysteries, and she's meeting her agent. Yeah, that's what it is. She's meeting her agent at Panera, and someone overhears her conversation about her new book and thinks that she is a assassin for hire, and hires her to kill her husband. And it's essentially a very comedic journey of how Finlay has to, well, does she do it, does she not? But then how she investigates this guy and kind of gets entangled into his life. I don't want to give too much away because there's so much that you don't know going into it that just gets unraveled as you read, and I don't want to just, I'm just going to leave it there. I enjoyed it. I won't be continuing the series because I've also been told that the second one is super not closed door, just a lot of sexual scenes and just way over the top of the romance. So I think I'm good with just reading the first one, even though it does leave off on kind of a cliffhanger. The main storyline is wrapped up nicely, and I think I'm good with just leaving it there. I gave it, what did I give it? 3.5 stars. So I enjoyed it, but I'm good just stopping with the first one. Guys, I started a lot of series this month without realizing it. So another one is a series. This is One Little Lie by Colleen Coble. This follows Jane Hardy, who is a police sergeant, or police chief, I should say. She ends up becoming chief after her father retires, who was also chief. It's in a small town, Pelican Harbor. Not a whole lot happens. They have pretty much 3-4 police officers total, but murders keep happening. People are going missing. Super, like, all of a sudden, this small town has a whole host of crime surrounding it. Jane Hardy's dad is being framed for, or he says he's being framed for theft and within the police force. And there's also a reporter who is, his name's Reed. He comes to town and you get his perspective as well. And so you get information that it seems like he knows Jane from somewhere previous, and you slowly learn that her dad and her were in a cult for like 15 years ago. She was born and raised into a cult until her and her dad escaped 15 years from when the time the book is taking place. So all of this is going on, and it all gets intertwined, and you slowly like learn about her past and what happened with the cult, and who is this Reed guy showing up with his son who's claiming to be a journalist, following her as a woman police chief, and what that looks like. But then also there's all of these strings of murders, and people are going missing. How is this all connected? Why does it have anything to do with Jane, and who's behind it, and who can you trust? It was and I really enjoyed it. And there's a faith underlined. Reed has a strong faith, and you can see because of her history with the cult, Jane is very skeptical, but she reads the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis in this book. Overall, loved it. It was 4 stars for me. And I do have the second one out from the library, which is called 2 Reasons to Run. I don't read the synopsis on this if you don't want any spoilers for the first book, just a warning. The next book that I read, I actually listened to an audio, is called Big Lies in a Small Town by Diane Chamberlaine. Really enjoyed this one. What did I end up giving it? 3.5, 4 stars. It was a really good listen. It took a little bit to get into it, especially because there is that dual timeline, and that can be a little tricky on audio, trying to remember, keep it straight in your head. And then I'm also reading like physical books, so just on my own, like trying to figure out, sometimes I'd have to rewind a couple minutes and re-listen so I could figure out where I was. But overall, really enjoyed it. It's a historical fiction. In the present day, we are following Morgan Christopher, and she is in prison when we meet her for a crime that she claims she did not commit. But she is given an opportunity by 2 women who show up one day to get out of jail, and she'd be on probation, but as long as she completed this assignment, she would be a free woman. And that assignment is to restore a mural, which she has no experience in art restoration. So she's, one, confused because she was just an art student before she went into prison. So how did anyone find her? Who found her? And why are they wanting her to restore this mural? She agrees to go, and through this timeline you figure out how she's connected to all of this. But the historical timeline opens up with a murder. Boys find a dead body, and that's kind of the first introduction to what's happening in the historical timeline. And then it flashes back even farther, and we are following Anna Dale, who is from, I believe, like New Hampshire or New York, somewhere up there. And she has been hired by the government to paint a mural for a post office in this town. And so she is in this town researching, trying to figure out what she wants the center of her mural to be. And while she's there painting this mural, she becomes entangled in the lives of the people who live there. One of which is a Black man. Well, he's a young man, about 17, I think. He's about to finish high school, and he is not treated very well. There's a lot of that, still that racial tension in the book, as well as there's a man who applied to do the mural who actually lives in that town, and he was denied. So there's that drama going on. Eventually, these 2 timelines, eventually, like they always do, merge together, and you can kind of see that it's the same mural, but you're trying to figure out how did the mural get in the hands of Morgan Christopher, what happened, because as Morgan is restoring this mural, there's some oddities to it, and these oddities point to what Annandale experienced in her time in this town. So another trigger warning, there's sexual assault in this one as well, but it's not nearly as graphic as Orphan Train, so it is pretty easy to skip over if you don't want to read it. You can kind of see where it's going and where it's leading up before it happens, but it wasn't nearly as graphic as Orphan Train. So I don't know if I said this already, but I gave it, let's see, about 3.5, 4 stars. Pretty good. This is like, I feel like this book is a really hard one to explain, so I'm sorry if that was really like a jumbled mess. I'm trying to there's so much that happens between the two timelines, but I did really appreciate how it was wrapped up, and learning, just seeing how the racial tensions were, and learning about a little bit about art restoration was really cool. So and it was nothing like I've ever read, so I always like when it's something completely different. Okay, so I have 2 more books on my list that I read, and they were my highest rated books, so that's super exciting to end the month on a high note. The first one is Love and a Little White Lie by Tammy L. Gray. This was a solid 4.5 star for me. This is a Christian fiction romance, friends to lovers, follows January, or Jan, and she is agnostic, atheist at the time of the book's open. She is hired into a church, and she is surprised by the people that she meets there, and a lot of her preconceived notions of church and religion and religious people are kind of challenged because, sorry, that was my cat, sorry for the shakiness. She just ran into my setup here. She's challenged in that way, but she's also mourning a breakup, and she's just trying to kind of get back on her feet and figure out where now, because she thought her life was headed one way and it's been completely derailed. Man, I love this book. I think the more I think about it, the more I love it. Sometimes when you finish a book, you're like, oh yeah, that was good, but then you keep thinking about it. I personally think it resonated with me because I wasn't as against religion. I had a belief in God, but I wasn't saved. And I went through a pretty bad breakup. And then shortly after, I met my husband and we became friends. And through this time, I came to faith, and then eventually my husband and I started dating and eventually got married, clearly. But it just reminded me a lot of my story and how God used heartache and my life being derailed to put me in the right where I needed to be to meet my husband. And so I think it just makes me feel really good reading a similar story. And I loved Tammy's writing, and I definitely will be continuing the series because it's a series, because I guess that's what I did, was series October and didn't even realize it. Right, buckle up, people. This is my 5-star read, and I'm so excited. Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. This is a science fiction book that takes place somewhere in the future because humans are living in space. So this follows the main character, Spensa, and she is wanting to be a pilot. That is pretty much like if you could pick the top people in society, the pilots, the people in the they call them the DDF, so like the Air Force essentially, they're like the top of society for the most part. And she has dreams of becoming a pilot and fighting the Krell. The Krell are some sort of alien life forms that attack them on this planet that they're on. They don't have a lot of information about how they got to the planet, because when they crash landed here, because they were being chased by these Krell, a bomb went off, a bunch of people died who actually knew what happened, and all of their records were wiped away. So there's a lot of questions of like, why are they on this planet? Who are the Krell? Why are the Krell chasing them? And no one seems to have the answers. But she wants to become a pilot to help fight and protect human civilization. But she's caught into a lot of obstacles because her dad has been labeled a coward. He was also a pilot, and he, in a battle, I think it was like maybe 10 years ago from when the book is taking place, he supposedly fled and ran away or tried to leave the planet and he was shot down. He's labeled a coward, which has a lot of repercussions on her life, Spence's life, her mom's life, and just her ability to get into flight school to begin with. And that's really all I want to say, because it's, but I will say Brandon Sanderson's writing, amazing. I'm going to read more and more. I already got the second book out from the library, which is Starsight. So I'm excited to, I might read it this month, even though I already have too many books on my TBR. But I'm dying to know what's gonna happen. But his world building, which I've been told his world building is great, and I never quite knew what that meant until I read this. I could see everything. I felt like I was watching a movie in my head when I was reading. There was no romance, which I like, because sometimes that takes away the story. Not that romance is bad. I saw a little potential of romance in a couple places. I'm like, ooh, maybe this will happen, but it didn't, and that didn't bother me at all. But the character growth from where they are at the beginning of the book to the end, and how even the interactions between two characters, how they grow and learn more about each other and give each other more like sympathy and come to empathize with one another and not be so standoffish just because of preconceived ideas. I mean, I could go on and on and on. If you haven't read this, especially if you haven't read sci-fi, or sci-fi is not your preferred genre, I would recommend this one, because it was so well written and it was so gripping, and I wanted to keep reading, because there was always, wait, what? That's happening? How is that connected? Or how is that connected? And then it's like you slowly figure it all out. So I really enjoyed this. 5-star. I'm hoping the rest of the series is just as good, and it's not like a downhill like most of the series that I've read before have been, where it's like, oh, the first one's my all-time favorite, and then you get to the third one, you're like, well, that was not as good as I was hoping. So that was my October wrap-up. That was very long and jumbled. I hope I made sense. That was my first one trying to explain books, and I hope I did an okay job. But I appreciate you all taking the time to sit through this. If you made it all the way to the end, put a UFO and a star for Skyward in the description box. Let me know what videos you want to see coming up, anything specific to the holidays, or really anything in general. I'm always open to ideas from you, and I appreciate you all so much. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.